Shalom, this is George Whitten, founder and director of Worthy News. It is October 2nd, 2024. The title of this episode is Yom Teruah, Wars and Signs in the Heavens. For those that have been listening to me for a long, long time, I am not a doom and gloomer. It's not the end of the world, it's the birthing of a kingdom. And I believe that we should be looking at prophecy not so much as figuring out how we're going to escape this world, but figuring out how we can be a blessing in the midst of the craziest times the world will ever experience. So there's a lot to cover. So let's just get right to it. We had a very interesting thing. We had a partial lunar eclipse. It happened to be on a time and was called a harvest moon. And that happened on September 17th, 2024. Now, what's interesting about that is while the world is looking at these images of the harvest supermoon, it was the same time that literally hundreds of pagers were exploding across Lebanon. It decimated a huge number of those involved in the terrorist organization called Hezbollah. And the following day, we had walkie-talkies explode. And so here we are. We had an event that happened in the heavens, and there was something very significant, something we had never heard of before. It's kind of like something that it's something you heard of like in a movie. And then we have another interesting thing because we have now an eclipse that's going to happen, and this is going to be on October 2nd. Well, it's going to happen across much of the Pacific Ocean, southern part of South America, part of Antarctica. And what is this partial eclipse? Well, that's happening the same day as Rosh Hashanah, or Yom Teruah. Yom Teruah is the Feast of Trumpets. Rosh Hashanah is the New Year. And so the idea is that you've collected all of your harvest, and now you can set up your taxes. So there is the biblical New Year that starts in Nisan, and then there is I don't want to say the governmental New Year, but there's the year that begins in the seventh month, Rosh Hashanah. But really, it's Yom Teruah. Well, Yom Teruah is the only feast that is celebrated on the first day of the month. Now, what's interesting about this feast is that even though it's a one-day feast, it's celebrated for 2 days. You may ask, well, why is it celebrated for 2 days? Well, the biblical calendar, you celebrated based on the lunar cycle. Well, you didn't know, unless you saw the new moon, whether or not the lunar cycle would be a 29-day month or a 30-day month. And that's why it's known as the feast that no one knows the day or the hour. So you can understand how this ties into biblical prophecy and how it's going to tie into the future. But so we have an eclipse happening. Well, what happens? Well, we literally have Israel beginning its operations inside of Lebanon. We reported on Worthy News how commandos were actually already operating inside of Lebanon before this happened. Well, as soon as they went into Lebanon, then you had, at the same time, rockets, 200 missiles fired at Israel. Now, what I found amazing about this whole aspect is how, while there were so many missiles fired, there was no casualties. It wasn't like a widespread number of casualties. And I really do believe that's God's hand watching over and protecting, those that are that are caught in the middle of all this, that are actually innocent. And I think that's actually going to be something like that, along with the Palestinians, and with the Lebanese. I really do believe that God has got His hand at work, and He is actually using Israel right now to remove the terrorists. But I look at it in a much different way. I look at it as an opportunity for the gospel to go forward. The gospel to go forward inside of Gaza. The gospel to go forward inside the West Bank, or what we know as Judea and Samaria. The gospel to go forth inside of Lebanon. I do believe that God has got His hands all over this, and that we're going to really see something unique happen. Well, the same time that we have the lunar eclipse, we also have a comet. And there's a comet that just is flying through the skies. And what's interesting is that it's going to be closest to the Earth on October 12th. October 12th happens to be Yom Kippur. Well, Yom Kippur is the Day of Atonement or the Day of Judgment, depending on where you are. For those of us that understand that we're covered by the blood of the Lamb, that He is the scapegoat that was provided, that was His blood was applied to the mercy seat, and our sins are forgiven. And then there are those that are saying rocks and mountains cover us from the wrath of the Lamb. And so that's why it's known as a Day of Atonement or known as a Day of Judgment. Along with that, we have a mini moon. We have a moon that's kind of with us for the next 2 months. This article is September 19th, and so we're gonna have a little mini moon that's circling the Earth that's gonna be with us for September and October, going into November. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic. The other thing that's kind of interesting, since it's been a while since I've done these videos, I'm going to try to make it a point as we go into a new year to do more of these videos. But for the time that the Lord has me been redeployed, the Lord has placed me in unique locations all over the United States at key strategic times so that I could actually see what was happening, so I could actually report without any kind of going through a media bias or going through I could actually be there. Well, while we've had all these different events that have happened, I was in Minneapolis just a week after George Floyd passed away. I was in Seattle with the Chaz and Chad riots. I was in Portland with the Antifa riots. I happened to be driving to Baltimore when the Key Bridge got hit by the tanker. I happened to go to East Palestine to go ahead and see the destruction with the derailment. I happened to be in Washington D.C. for the great rally in support of Israel. I happened to be going to New York. The night before, the day before, was when the earthquake hit New York. I happened to be in Israel. Well, I actually planned to be in Israel. So I happened to be in Israel for the 75th anniversary. It was in Jerusalem. And it just so happened that I was near Springfield, Ohio, when all of that commotion came out. It happened to be speaking in Indiana. And, there was a lot of reports about, they're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. Well, I did happen to find a communications report and a detailed report. And this report that someone gave me actually detailed how there was 4 Haitians that had 4 geese. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But what I have noticed as I've traveled around, it's not just Springfield; it's all over. Now, I've kind of gotten used to being at key locations when things happened. I happen to be living in Israel, and I helped a lot of Sudanese Christians that were escaping the Holocaust from the Muslims in Sudan. And they actually walked all the way across Egypt and came into Israel. And my wife and I just helped a bunch of Sudanese, helped them get asylum status, and just trying to be a blessing to the Sudanese. So I understand the kind of the dynamics at work when you're talking about a population that is suddenly overwhelmed and has a huge influx. But when I was there and I was praying, I was actually visiting. I visited quite a few different pastors. I was trying to get a lot of different perspectives. I talked to quite a few different people in the streets just to, have eyes and ears. And I happened to go to the different WalMarts and just stopping at different locations to kind of see what was up. And the one thing that I did hear, and I actually did find reports, is that they did talk about how crime had increased significantly, and the number of traffic accidents that had happened. Because, look, you're talking about displacing a society into a society that, it isn't like driving in the third world. If you've ever driven in the third world, I swear they don't know how to drive. They don't know how to drive. But that's really the situation. But when I was there, I was trying to get a different perspective, because I was really trying to figure out what's happening spiritually. Because while everyone can go ahead and report the dynamics of how this little town of 50 some thousand people has all of a sudden another 15,000 Haitians. What's happening spiritually? And so as I was praying about it, we've been doing Worthy News quite some time. And, this type of disbursement of populations is actually happening all over. For example, in Germany, there are 1.2 million Syrians that are living in Germany. They literally left Syria, and now 1 in 20 Syrians are all living in Germany. And what you're finding, and what I'm finding, is that the displacement of people is in such huge concentrations that it's creating a type of discourse, a type of internal, like an internal war. Well, that's kind of very prophetic. I'll explain why. But as I was praying through it reminded me about how the Assyrian Empire ruled. Now, King Adad Nahari, who ruled from 1307 to 1275 BC, he expanded his population. And one of the things that he implemented was a policy of deportation of huge segments of populations from one region to another. And so this was something that was kept on. And the reason being, they had an empire that was basically from Egypt all the way close to India. And so you have this huge, vast empire. And how do you go ahead and police, and how do you prevent uprisings? Well, the idea is to keep everyone at war with each other. And so what they did was they literally picked up entire populations and moved them. And in this dispersion, what you'll find in history is this is when you had the 10 lost tribes. And what took place was literally entire towns inside the Galilee, inside of, Judea and Samaria, picked up and moved into different locations. Well, how did God use that? Well, because they were picked up as entire people groups and moved, then you actually had a segment of the Jewish population that was able to keep itself entirely Jewish for 2,000 years to fulfill a different portion of prophecy, because then God said, I'll restore the Jewish people back to the land. Well, how could you restore the Jewish people back to the land? If they were just scattered one by one, they would have just lost their identity. Just like the Hittites lost their identity, just like the Assyrians lost their identity, just like the Babylonians lost their identity. Everyone lost their identity except the Jewish people. And so God used this for good. So as I was contemplating this, I'm thinking to myself, this is not a Springfield, Ohio situation. This is not just one. It's really an international situation. You're seeing this all over the world. And the Lord said something interesting. He said, for nation shall rise against nation. And this is in Matthew 24:7. That word nation is the word ethnos. Ethnic versus ethnic. Now, why did the Assyrians keep everyone in civil war? Well, so that they could maintain control. And so if Springfield, Ohio just had 100 Haitians, well, 100 Haitians couldn't really stand against a population of 50,000. But if you put 15,000 Haitians, then all of a sudden you actually have the dynamics of a potential civil war. And now those in Springfield, Ohio are so focused on the Haitian situation, they're not looking at the bigger picture. Who actually is moving these people? Who's actually displacing these people? Why are they keeping your eyes fixated on this problem when there's actually a much bigger problem? And so you can see how those that are trying to implement a globalist system are actually using this. Because we're not just seeing it in Ohio. We're seeing it in Germany. We're seeing it in Finland. We're seeing it in Sweden. We're seeing it all over Europe. And so this is an interesting dynamic that we're seeing. So now how do we react? Well, first, look at it as an opportunity. God brought people to your neighborhood that you probably would never have seen. And so let's make this an opportunity. Let's make this an opportunity to go ahead and share. Because, I think that we get so caught up in the politics and so caught up in all the that we're forgetting we're really at war spiritually with principalities and powers that are trying to disrupt our physical lives. But as believers, we're kings and priests of the Most High God. And when it said that Paul, when the Lord gave to Peter, said, upon you I'll build the church, and you shall go against the gates of hell. It's not the church's on defense; the church is on offense. I mean, we're going to the gates of hell. We're grabbing the gates of hell, and we're saying, "Let our people go." And we have authority and power in spiritual places to tread on serpents and scorpions over all power of the enemy. While the enemy is trying to use this to disrupt the world, can we just use this as an opportunity to share the gospel, as an opportunity to share the love of the Lord, to share, hey, what are you doing, Lord? And so I do believe that we're in this influx. And talking about wars, I'd be remiss to say, hey, we're getting ready to have a major war inside of Israel. As I record this on October 2nd, I think that Israel's attack won't happen today or tomorrow. Israel will be in the midst of Rosh Hashanah. And then Friday, that would be on October 4th, that would be a Shabbat. So I think the earliest we probably would see something would be Saturday night or Sunday morning. Now, chances are that Israel won't spend a whole lot of time. And the timing that this could take place, going from Rosh Hashanah, going to Yom Teruah or Yom Kippur, these are known as the days of Norim. This is the the days of awe. These are the days that you're called to turn to the Lord. It's your time to repent, because the day of judgment's coming, Yom Kippur. And so, we're seeing now Israel has begun its ground invasion inside of Lebanon, and this is on the backdrop of them literally, you're having nations that are trying to stop Israel. You had Turkey's Erdogan actually called the United Nations General Assembly together to recommend force against Israel if it continues its attacks on Hamas or Hezbollah. Well, so we're going to have the world come against Israel. This is what he's advocating. Well, doesn't that sound a little biblical? And then what was interesting is that Israel was able to not only take out a bunch of terrorists with the pagers, but they took out the leader. They took out Nasrallah. And it wasn't just a little bit of whatever. 80 tons of bunker bombs. 80 tons. That's, a ton is 2,000 pounds. So you're talking about 160,000 pounds of armaments were used to make sure that the head of Hezbollah was no longer in action. And what I found amazing is how some of the press reported how Nasrallah was a friend to Christians and a friend to Jews. I'm like, do you not know that this is the head of a terrorist organization, which many of its members were responsible for the deaths of Americans, the deaths of Israelis, the deaths of innocent people around the world? I mean, this is kind of a crazy dynamic that we witnessed. And along with that, well, not only did they take out Nasrallah, but they took out a bunch of the senior leadership. Honestly, it's like that the head of the snake was decapitated, and now they're going after, we could have a fundamental change in the Middle East. I know that people aren't looking at, they're looking at prophecy and they're saying, how are we going to escape? I'm looking at, how are we going to seize this opportunity to have the gospel open up to us again in Lebanon, to have the gospel open up again to us in Gaza, how the gospel is going to open up for us again inside of, the entire Middle East. I really do believe this is going to be one of our finest hours if we as the body understand what is actually happening dynamically. That's all I'm going to kind of share with you today. There's obviously a lot going on, and listen, I just want to encourage you. It's not the end of the world. It's a birthing of a kingdom, and we're birthing the kingdom of God. And the one thing we can control is that this gospel must be preached to the ends of the age, and then the end will come. So, you know, seize what's happening. It is a very unique year. We've had a very dynamic year. If you haven't seen my message, the Simchat Torah War, is this a water breaking moment? I really encourage you to watch it, because I do believe that we are entering into a season of a great harvest. Everyone's focused on the tares. They're not really understanding the harvest is growing with the tares. And we're seeing, on Word of the News, we're reporting how huge revivals are taking place. We had a huge situation in Nicaragua, which is basically overrun really by the communists, and he had 650,000 people attend revival meetings, and tens of thousands were getting saved. We had an article about in Brazil, you had 14,500 people get baptized in the Amazon jungle. You have people inside of colleges that are having movements, and things are happening. I know that we want to really focus now. Obviously the United States, and most people don't realize there was 100 elections around the world this year. It wasn't just the United States that were having elections. It's all over. And obviously the United States is having its major election. And so there's a lot of people hyper-focused on the politics. But I really encourage you to understand that God is using wars and rumors of wars to bring forth pressure in a good way. Not in a bad way, in a good way, because pressure is what, that's how you make diamonds. That's how you go ahead and you refine. And I do believe that we're going to see a purging, a purging of the dross out of our lives. This season that we're in, Yom Teruah going into Yom Kippur and then going into Sukkot, this is a season of repentance. So I encourage you, look, make this a day of change. Change the way you're looking at the world. It's not doom and gloom. It's an opportunity. Seize it. Until next time, I really thank you for joining. Sign up, subscribe. If you're not getting a Worthy Briefs, I really encourage you to get a Worthy Briefs. It's free. I also brought back a chat room we used to have, dozens of people come to faith through the chat rooms, and I decided to bring it back. I kind of going old school again. If you want to jump on, you can go to Worthy Christian Forums. Now we have thousands of people discussing all kinds of subjects. If you want to come and discuss, look, it's okay to have a difference of opinion. Look, we want to have differences of opinion. We want to discuss this in love. If you want to join that kind of environment, come to Worthy Christian Forums. And also, I just want to big shout out to our journalists. Stefan Boss is in Budapest. He's doing a great thing. Karen Faulkner in Rome is doing a great thing. Our journalists in Jerusalem and throughout the United States, we're seeing an impact. There's just the amount of information that we're able to share truthfully. We're not allowed to lie. We're just distributing prayer points. And so I encourage you, if you're not following Worthy News, follow Worthy News. Until next time, this is George Whitten reporting for Worthy News.